Happy Monday, everybody. I hope you're having a good day today so far and had a good weekend. So let me start out by saying on Friday, I went to sign into my Anchor app, which is where I record the podcast for audio, and then it's distributed to Spotify and Google Podcast and Apple through that app. I went to sign in, and it had automatically logged me out. And when I finally was able to get back in, all of my episodes were gone. Everything. Over a year's worth of work, just gone. And I thought, okay, something's wrong. Let me get in touch with Anchor. Let me figure out what's happening. So I send them an email, and they email me back, and they inform me that my podcast was taken down for potentially hateful content. No warning, no email to say, hey, there are some episodes that are up that you said certain things that go against our guidelines. We're going to take those down. No warning at all. Even YouTube gives you warnings. They just deleted all of it. And because it was on my phone, and I didn't think to back it up, and not that I really had any way to back up all those episodes, so it's just gone. The only thing that I have is whatever episodes I was able to upload to YouTube that I didn't lose. I'm pretty upset because I was building an audience. I had people listening from tons of different countries. I don't know if they listened more than once or if they were listening several times. I just know that it had reached many, many countries, like 70-something countries. And I was very excited about that. And now I have to start over. So I believe the episodes that were up, they're still on Google Podcast. I know that. So all the episodes are still there. And I'm going to figure out a way to go in and download those to like a flash drive from Google, if I can do that, and get them all back and then put them back on this. But I just started a new Anchor app podcast. I couldn't find any other app that I could do it completely free. So I just started over. It's still called I Just Gotta Say Something. It's just going to have a new URL when you go to it. And I haven't checked, but I'm assuming that when you go to the regular URL that I had originally had, it probably will not be there. I'm going to see if it's there. So it's still up. They're still there. I wonder why this has a purple dot. I don't know. It's still there. When I tried to sign in earlier, I couldn't get into it. Well, we'll see. I'll figure this out, because when I tried to sign in, it wouldn't let me. So this is strange that this is there. I don't know. But it's still up on all the platforms. So, yeah. Okay, well, next time I guess we'll try that. I don't know. Let's continue on. Let's read our daily promise. In a little wrath I hid my face from thee for a moment, but with everlasting kindness will I have mercy on thee, saith the Lord thy Redeemer. Rejoice now and forevermore in the eternal covenant of peace bought by the Son of Righteousness. God's compassion will last forever and his mercy to everlasting. Look to him and embrace the heavenly hope promised to all his beloved children. Okay. So the first thing I want to do is I want to talk about Biden's horrific State of the Union speech. It was horrible. There was so many stinking lies in it. So I found an opinion piece from The Guardian about his speech. And then what I want to do is compare some fact checks from that speech and see what the differences are of the people who fact checked actually and the ones who fact check and try to pretend that it was real. So this is from The Guardian, and I don't know who it was written by. I think it says it at the bottom. So there's always something a bit grim about the State of the Union, a set piece of American political theater. The annual speech by the president to a joint session of Congress is choreographed to eliminate any chance of accidental sincerity. The president speaks in carefully calibrated spin. Every word sounds like it has been focus grouped. Members of the opposition party make a show of their animosity, vamping for the cameras with either staid, dignified displeasure or ravenous hatred, depending on where they are running for re-election. No one's mind is changed, and little new information is delivered. By its nature, the speech is meant to describe the status quo. It is not meant to change it. This year, Biden had a particularly grim task. After months and months of negotiations with Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia proved fruitless, his sweeping economic agenda, the Build Back Better plan, appears to be dead. The two voting rights bills that would have helped secure the franchise for Black Americans and protect the integrity of future elections were killed when Manchin and Senator Kristen Sinema of Arizona declined to support an exemption to the filibuster, meaning that the erosion of voting rights in Republican-controlled states is likely to advance unchallenged. First of all, there's not an erosion of voting rights. We all know that that's a huge lie. We all know that everybody has the capability of going and getting a state ID or a driver's license so that they can vote. And I will tell you, this was enacted in 2020. So if you live in Texas, when it's time to go renew your driver's license this time, because it just was put in place in 2020. So mine, I have to renew in April of next year. And now you have to make an appointment. Well, I guess you can walk in, but it's best to make an appointment. You have to go in to renew your license. You cannot do it online. And you have to take them your birth certificate or something that can prove your citizenship and your lawful residency in that state. And they're doing that with everybody. So if you don't have the right documents to prove that you're a U.S. citizen and a lawful resident of Texas, you will be denied renewing your driver's license, meaning you won't be able to go vote because you will no longer have a valid driver's license to do so. I think it's great because I don't want people that aren't legal residents of America and Texas to be able to vote because that's not right. If you're not a legal resident, you don't have a say in what happens here, period. So it's a lie that it's going to keep people from being able to vote. The only people that won't be able to vote are people who are not legal residents of America and Texas. And I don't know if they're doing this in other states, though. So just remember, if you're in Texas, make sure you get your birth certificate before you go renew your license. Okay, where did I leave off? Okay, many economic indicators are strong, but with inflation running rampant, this means little to working families who see their paychecks covering less and less of what they need. This spring, the U.S. Supreme Court will hand down opinions that will drastically reshape American government and American lives, including the case from Mississippi, Dobbs versus Jackson, Women's Health, that will overturn Roe v. Wade. The midterms are coming, and in Europe, a pointless and brutal war of self-aggrandizement has been launched by an erratic and mendacious dictator with a massive stockpile of nuclear weapons. Yeah, and you can go find my last episode about the Ukrainian and Russian conflict and get a little bit more information about why this is happening. Perhaps it was to be expected then that Biden's speech was wide-ranging in tone, friendly, ambitious in its agenda, and light on specifics. He opened with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, condemning the murderous ambitions of Vladimir Putin and praising the courage of the unexpectedly resilient Ukrainian military and civilian volunteer forces to rapturous applause. The Ukrainian ambassador to the United States, Oksana Markarova, was in attendance as a guest of the First Lady, and she received the night's first standing ovation, her hand placed over her heart from her balcony seat, as lawmakers below fluttered her country's blue and yellow flag. Let me tell you what absolutely disgusts me is you have all of these leftists that hate and desecrate their own country's flag. They hate the American flag, yet they're proudly waving the Ukrainian flag. I'm not waving flag of another country. I'm not going to stand under the flag of another country. I will only stand under the flag of America, period. I'm an American and I care about America and its citizens. Now, that's not to say that I don't have compassion for these innocent people in Ukraine and the innocent people in Russia that do not want this war. However, this war, all of the elites, all of the people in power want this war. It is the new crisis to usher in the Great Reset. And you can say that's conspiracy all you want. If you read Revelations, it's prophecy. And it will happen. Period. And they've moved on from COVID because people are sick and tired of being locked down and the mandates and the vaccines and all that. They're tired of being controlled by their government. So midterm elections are coming up. Let's move away from that because we don't want to lose votes because we're too crazy and too overreaching. Now let's move to Russia and Ukraine and tell people to stand behind Ukraine and they're good people. The Ukrainian government is just as corrupt as any other government that's out there. In fact, it was Ukraine that was funneling tons and tons of money to the Biden family through Hunter Biden being on the board of the Burisma. So tell me why that we're all backing Ukraine. They're both bad countries, let's be honest. None of the countries in the world right now are typically great. All of them have gone authoritarian. And at least they've tried, and some haven't succeeded, some have. Canada, Australia, New Zealand, they've all succeeded in it. What does that tell you when Democrats and Republicans are totally hand in hand and in support of something together, when Democrats and Republicans never have agreements? They're always against each other. When they all come together, that should be a big red flag that, hey, wait a minute, I'm not so sure that I should trust this. And by the way, we have no moral superiority to be condemning Putin for invading Ukraine when we've done it with Syria, Libya, Afghanistan, Vietnam. We don't have that superiority, and we can't do that. It's not right. We aren't any better as a nation. And I'm not talking about individual citizens. I'm talking about our leaders that have been empowered, that have moved us in this direction of being a warmonger nation. That's what we have been for decades. And we have ruined countries. We have gone in and we've tried to take over them and spread quote unquote democracy, which we're not a democracy, we're a constitutional republic. And we have ruined these countries. We've decimated them and ruined the lives of these citizens, probably made them worse than they were to begin with. And most of them didn't want us there. They didn't want our help. We're not the world police, and we have no business meddling in any of the affairs of another country. I mean, it's that simple. Just because we're powerful doesn't mean we get to do whatever we want. But clearly, they don't understand that. Continuing on. Homages to the Ukrainian struggle were everywhere in the House chamber, with a number of women lawmakers dressed in blue and yellow ensembles, men and women alike wearing stickers of the Ukrainian flag on their lapels, and others building subtler signals of solidarity. When the camera lingered on Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts, she had a cloth sunflower, the Ukrainian national symbol, pinned to her collar. Biden boasted of the devastating impact of Western economic sanctions on the Russian economy, reaffirmed his support for NATO, and vowed to deploy the Justice Department to seize yachts belonging to Putin's friends. Okay, these sanctions that are being placed on Russia, they don't really do anything when you look at the fact that we are still buying over 600,000 barrels of oil from Russia a day. So we're placing sanctions on Russia. We're condemning Putin for what he's doing and telling him, oh, you're wrong, you shouldn't be doing this. But hey, we're going to keep buying oil from you and financing this war indefinitely. People are talking about Coca-Cola and McDonald's. Boycott them because they're not stopping their services in Russia. Like IKEA shut down all of their stores in Russia. Then you have other people pulling out. You've got banks closing their accounts with Russians. You've got all of this going on. And people are mad at Coca-Cola and McDonald's for not stopping their services. Well, you know what? We haven't stopped our services. We're still buying oil from them. So who are we to condemn Coca-Cola and McDonald's for still making money? The citizens didn't do anything wrong. So why are you going to hurt the innocent people? That doesn't hurt Putin. We are fully financing this war. And so are all the European nations still buying oil from Russia. We condemn it, but we pay for it. Does it make sense to you? I didn't think so. I keep forgetting where I stopped. Okay, promisingly, it seems as if concerns over growing Russian aggression might spark a renewed interest in energy independence that could help the U.S. and Europe break their addiction to Russian oil and gas. Yeah, except they don't want to break the independence. They don't want to break our dependence on Russian oil and become energy independent through our own oil sources like we were under Trump. They want to go buy oil from Iran. Now, I heard that we were trying to negotiate with buying oil from Saudi Arabia, and they told us no. And so Biden is working on a deal to purchase oil through Iran. But why? Why would we not produce our own like we were under Trump? In fact, we weren't just producing our own, we were producing enough to export oil as well. So why wouldn't we do that? None of it makes sense. Okay. Speaking of the recent return of significant numbers of American troops to Central Europe for the first time in years, Biden reaffirmed his commitment to preventing a direct military confrontation with Russia and emphasized that the troops would be there not to attack the Russians, but to protect NATO allies. One suspects that Putin will not appreciate the distinction. Of course he won't. When Biden moved on to domestic policy, the crowd quickly became divided. As he touted his American Rescue Plan, last year's COVID relief package, boos erupted from the Republican side when Biden noted that the 2017 Republican tax cuts had primarily benefited the very rich. It was a theme he maintained as he turned to his bipartisan infrastructure law, the $1 trillion legislative treatment that provides funds for the maintenance and repair of the nation's physical infrastructure, roads, bridges, airports, commuter trains, and internet. Biden touted a series of shovel-ready projects he claims will go into effect this year and emphasized the bill's ability to encourage the return of the American manufacturing sector. Yeah, Trump was already doing that. Don't forget that one. Also, the American Rescue Plan, I have not benefited. I am struggling, living paycheck to paycheck. Everything is so expensive. Costs almost $60 to fill up a 17-gallon tank of gas. When it used to cost us like $22, $23, it's ridiculous. The grocery store is getting super expensive. We made spaghetti one night, and to buy the hamburger meat, it was outrageous what we had to pay for it. When I'm used to paying like for a 5-pound chuck of meat, we pay like $6 before, and it's like 11. It's ridiculous. Eventually, I'm not going to be able to even afford hamburger meat because of inflation, and it's crazy. But when Trump was in office, even during the pandemic, when Trump was in office, I was still doing better financially then than I am now when the pandemic is basically over. So, it didn't help. Domestic manufacturing was largely his prescription for fighting inflation, too. Biden introduced his broader economic agenda with a call to make more stuff in the U.S. and to use the federal government's purchasing power to support those American-made goods. This segue led into a litany of briefly visited agenda items, such as allowing Medicare to negotiate prescription drug prices, cutting the cost of child care for working-class families so that more women could return to the paid workforce, establishing a 15% minimum corporate tax rate, and supporting the Labor Strengthening PRO Act. Also, Biden said that the way to make it easier for Americans to afford things is to make companies charge less. But companies charge more because of inflation, and the stuff that they have to buy to run the company and make the product has gone up, so they have to go up in their prices so they can keep buying the stuff to make the product so we can buy it, and that in turn raises the price of what it costs to get it for the consumer. It's a trickle-down effect. That's how inflation works. It trickles all the way down to the lowest person. Many of these proposals seem less like Biden was putting forward achievable goals for the next year of his presidency, and more like he was shifting through the wreckage of his disastrous Build Back Better negotiations with Manchin, searching for some workable leftovers. Most of the items he proposed had already been presented to Congress. None of them had been able to get through the obstructionism of the Republican Party and the Manchin cinema bloc. These things would substantially improve the lives of Americans, but it was clear he had no plan for how to implement any of them. Now, they wouldn't help. Come on, let's be honest. This was true especially for abortion rights. Though reproductive choice advocates had long urged Biden to say the word abortion in public, he has never done so as president. He referred tonight only offhandedly to the importance of reproductive rights. There was no mention of the fact that Roe v. Wade has been nullified in the state of Texas for 6 months as of Tuesday. There was no mention of the fact that the Reproductive Health Act, an attempt to legislatively secure the federal right to an abortion, failed in the Senate last week. Yeah, so they tried to push that in, and it didn't pass in the Senate. And what it would do is it would make it a federal law so that even if Roe v. Wade was overturned, even states wouldn't be allowed to implement their restrictions on abortion. There was no mention of the fact that of the five Supreme Court justices present at the speech, 3 of them, John Roberts, Brett Kavanaugh, and Amy Coney Barrett, will vote to eliminate that right in a few short months. I also think that Clarence Thomas would also vote for that. We have to protect a woman's right to choose, said Biden, not offering any ideas as to how that right might be protected. The camera cut momentarily to Amy Coney Barrett, who pursed her lips as thin as paper. Also, he made a quote in there, and they're not mentioning it here. You know, you've heard reproductive rights, a woman's right to choose. We've heard all of that. But at the speech, he specifically referred to maternal reproductive rights. The fact, I think that's what he said. I know he used the word maternal. And Michael Knowles made a perfectly good point that this was a very sadistic euphemism that they're using here. Because when you say maternal, you are in fact admitting that the woman is already a mother. That now that she is pregnant, she's now a mother already before the child is even born. And so they are admittedly telling people, yeah, we know that she's a mother, but we're still going to let her kill her child. Very dark. Very dark. Very evil. In this way, the speech was a perfect summation of Biden's presidency. Good intentions, laughable, with only halting, sporadic, uncreative, and trepidatious pursuit of actually enacting them. Unlike his predecessor, Biden tends to stay on script, except he fumbled and mumbled through everything. I was laughing so hard. It was so funny because he just can't do it. You know, and you could pinpoint the moment in his speech when he absolutely just disappeared. His mind was gone. He was no longer there. And he just started slurring his words more, getting off track. He rebooted in the middle of the thing. It was really awful to watch, but hilarious at the same time. Awful in the fact that that is the leader of our nation, but hilarious that that is the leader of our nation. Biden tends to stay on script, but the State of the Union speech featured several ad-libs, a product some suspected of the multiple revisions the speech was subjected to at the last minute as Russia's invasion of Ukraine placed new demands on the broadcast. The last of these was probably the most apropos. Go get him, Biden told the nation. Him who? Get him how? It didn't make sense, but so little of this does. This was by Mariah Donegan from The Guardian. Yeah, the speech really, really didn't make any sense. It truly, truly didn't. And it was all lies. He condemned Big Pharma for the cost of insulin for people with diabetes, but then he praised Big Pharma for the vaccines. And then later on, I think he condemned Big Pharma again. And it's like, which is it? Is Big Pharma good or is Big Pharma bad? And they didn't mention it in here. But the fact that he stood there and lied through his teeth and said that the Democrats have always said that the answer is not to defund the police, but to fund the police. That's gaslighting at its finest that they sit there and said that. There's a thing here from HeadlineUSA.com. BLM slams Biden for vowing to quote-unquote fund the police. And you can see Maxine Waters at the speech. She looked really, really ticked off. But it says, in an attempt to distance his party from the radical defund the police movement, Biden said during his speech, we should all agree the answer is not to defund the police. The answer is to fund the police. Fund them with resources and training they need to protect our communities. In response, the official Black Lives Matter organization tweeted, POV, listening to Biden declare the answer is not to defund the police, it's to fund the police. And it's got that picture of Maxine Waters. And it says, no, Biden, we don't all agree. We still say hashtag defund the police and hold killer cops accountable. It says, join the family of hashtag Andrew Joseph III and Black Lives Matter to end qualified immunity and demand police accountability. So, leftist Representative Cori Bush of Massachusetts, who is a part of the so-called squad, also blasted Biden and claimed that funding the police has resulted in a, quote, a record for fatal police shootings, end quote. With all due respect, Mr. President, you didn't mention saving black lives once in the speech. All our country has done is given more funding to police. The result, 2021 set a record for fatal police shootings. Defund the police, invest in our communities. Yeah, he didn't mention Black Lives Matter because Black Lives Matter were useful idiots to start riots, loot everything, destroy everything, make things so chaotic that they could install Biden as the president, and now that they've used you, they're done. They don't need you anymore. And they will try to trot you back out when they need you again, which would probably be here in the midterm elections. They'll start riling up Antifa and BLM again and get them back out in the streets. That's probably what's going to happen. Biden's comment earned praise from other groups, however, including from many of the congressional Republicans who attended the State of the Union. House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy of California and House Minority Whip Steve Scalise of Louisiana even led the GOP caucus and given Biden a standing ovation. I don't give him a standing ovation, and I don't give him praise for saying it because it's a lie. It was a lie used to garner votes because people are tired of the crime rates going up. They want something done. They don't want police to be defunded. They want more police in their communities. They want them to have more of a budget to be able to protect the communities. And so they know that they were losing on that front, so they had to change course. They don't really agree with it. They're probably really not going to do it, but they're just going to say it so they don't lose votes over it. It's all a lie. Now, we're going to quickly fact check the speech. It says here, I'm just going to go to the fact checks. This is from PolitiFact first. The claim, Putin's latest attack on Ukraine was premeditated and totally unprovoked. They said that it's accurate, that Russia's attack on Ukraine stands out as an unusually stark violation of the rule of the post-World War II era. In this context, the invasion of Ukraine seems to be an extremely clear violation of Article 2, Paragraph 4 of the United Nations Charter. Is Russia a part of the United Nations? Anyway, the invasion Putin launched targeted a sovereign neighbor that had not threatened them militarily. That's not true. They have been in a war for 8 years in Ukraine through the Russian-backed people, and I don't remember how you pronounce their names, but if you go listen to the podcast that I did last week about the whole conflict, you'll understand what is actually happening. This is not just Putin bad and all of a sudden he decides to invade Ukraine. Things have been happening for almost a decade. So this was a lie. Claim, Putin may circle Kiev with tanks, but he'll never gain the hearts and souls of the Iranian people. Now, people say that he said Iranian. I believe that he accidentally said Uranian, because he was trying to say Ukrainian, but he forgot the K. I don't think he said Iranian. I really don't. But it is true. He did call them something that they're not. The claim, our economy created over 6.5 million new jobs just last year, more jobs in 1 year than ever before in the history of the United States. We rated this half true. He has a point about the raw number of jobs created and the fact that it was bigger than any previous year for which data is available, but as the U.S. population has grown, so has the labor force. Using the annual percentage increase of job gains, 2021 put up strong numbers but did not set an all-time record. The number of jobs in 2021 increased by about 4.4%, which was the highest percentage since 1979. Still going back to 1940, the percentage increase seen in 2021 was exceeded 10 times. Okay, this is a lie. It's not even half true. It's a lie. The job numbers that they are giving us are the people who were let go at the start of the pandemic and that are now going back into the workforce, back to their jobs. These are not new jobs created. These are old jobs that have been sitting there waiting for the workers to return. So it's a lie. By the end of this year, the deficit will be down to less than half what it was before I took office. The only president ever to cut the deficit by more than $1 trillion in a single year. I don't even see how that would be possible. But this says that the math is correct based on projections, but this leaves out important context about exactly how big recent deficits have been. According to the Congressional Budget Office, the deficit at the end of 2020 was $3.129 trillion due to the pandemic-driven economic collapse and historic government spending to cushion the blow. At the end of 2022, the CBO estimates the deficit will be $1.153 trillion. That's about 36% of the deficit 2 years before. But the deficits since 2020 are off the charts high. The last time the deficit cracked the $1 trillion mark was in 2009 during the Great Recession. So it's not surprising that no other president has overseen a deficit reduction of over $1 trillion. The CBO predicts that deficits will begin to rise after 2024. I don't know anything about it, so I can't say whether it's true or false. All I know is I don't see how it could be done. I really don't. We'll see. I doubt it. Under the new guidelines, most Americans and most of the country can now go mask-free, and based on projections, more of the country will cross this point in the next couple of weeks. Now, I'm not even going to bother reading what they say. The only reason that they're doing this is because of the midterm elections. This has been theater the entire time. After the 2 weeks to slow the curve, it's been complete political theater. They have never thought that masks work. They don't think that masks work. They don't even wear them. So, no, it's a lie. It's a lie to get votes. 75% of adult Americans are fully vaccinated, and hospitalizations are down by 77%. Most Americans can remove their mask and stay in the classroom and move forward safely. Yeah, again, this is another thing to make sure that they are not losing votes. Keep the schools open, even though they're the ones that wanted to keep the schools closed. The teachers' unions fought to keep the schools closed. So, I would say that this is a lie. The liability shield makes gun manufacturers the only industry in America that can't be sued. The only one. It's so crazy to me that they fact-checked this as false. It says Congress has passed other laws that protect a variety of business sectors from lawsuits in certain situations, so this type of lawsuit isn't unique to the gun industry. The law that protects gun makers is the 2005 Protection of Lawful Commerce and Arms Act. The purpose of the law is to generally protect gun dealers and manufacturers from lawsuits for shooting deaths. But the law lists 6 exceptions where civil suits can occur. It does not protect gun dealers who transfer a gun knowing it would be used for criminal purposes, nor those who knowingly break state or federal law if the violation results in harm. Gun manufacturers can also be sued if the gun, when used properly, causes injury because the product is defective. The act provides incredibly robust protections of a kind that almost no other sector gets, but it's true that it does not mean the gun industry can't be sued. Biden claims this evening was just as wrong as Hillary Clinton's almost identical statement in 2015, Walter Olson, a senior fellow at the Cato Institute, told PolitiFact. The thing about it is, there's another industry that can't be sued. Big Pharma, when it comes to the vaccines, and if you have serious adverse reactions or die from it, they can't be sued. So that was an absolute lie. Under my plan, nobody earning less than $400,000 a year will pay any additional penny in new taxes, not a single penny. So they try to say that this is accurate, but that it doesn't include direct tax increases on households with less than $400,000 of income. But Biden has proposed higher taxes on corporations. It doesn't work like that. Like, this is the same thing, the trickle-down effect. It will affect us, even though he says it won't. The $2 trillion tax cut passed in the previous administration benefited the top 1% of Americans. That's not true. I benefited. Absolutely, I did. Our infrastructure is ranked 13th in the world. It said it's correct based on a commonly used report. Another one from American Society of Civil Engineers in 2021 gave us a C-. I don't know much about infrastructure, so I couldn't say whether that's true or not. There's been a law in the books for almost a century to make sure taxpayers' dollars support American jobs and businesses. Every administration says they'll do it, Democrat and Republican, but we are actually doing it. So apparently this is a good description of the law, but there are loopholes. 1933, the depths of the Great Depression, the U.S. had the Buy American Act, and it requires the federal government to buy American-made goods whenever possible. But like you said, it has loopholes. The American Rescue Plan is helping millions of families on Affordable Care Act plans save $2,400 a year on their health care premiums. See, I can't really answer this or not because I don't know. Now, really quickly, we're going to look at the 3 biggest falsehoods in his address. This is basedpolitics.com, and it's by Brad Palumbo. Fake news about how great his stimulus was. One of the first things I did as president was fight to pass the American Rescue Plan. That's what he said, okay? Says this is false on several fronts. For one thing, it's planned very little to promote vaccination or directly combat COVID. Even the left-leaning PolitiFact acknowledged that just 1% of its spending went to vaccines and less than 10% of the massive spending bill was directly related to COVID. Most of it was wasteful, fraud-rife welfare spending and big new government programs. And Biden's stimulus did not work or create lots of jobs. On the contrary, it fell short of the job promises the White House outlined if they spent nothing on stimulus at all. And he explained this before, saying the economy only created 6.1 million jobs in 2021, even less than was projected without the stimulus spending. So not only did the 4 million jobs promised by President Biden, Pelosi, and his many progressive allies fail to materialize, the Democrats spent $1.9 trillion in taxpayer money, roughly $13,250 per federal taxpayer, and ended up with even fewer jobs. The second one, repeated false claims about not raising anyone's taxes. This is completely false. Since taking office, Biden has put forward multiple tax proposals that would increase taxes on Americans earning less than $400,000. This includes a new tax on nicotine products, which would hurt poor Americans hardest. No kidding. Increased corporate taxes, which workers would bear through lower wages and more. Even liberal-leaning think tanks and analysts have acknowledged that Biden's pledge simply isn't true, and parroting it yet again at the State of the Union doesn't change this. Number 3, claiming his plans will reduce the deficit. An analysis by the Wharton School of Business found that Biden's Build Back Better spending agenda would increase the national debt by 2% over the long run under rosy conditions and by 25% under more realistic conditions. So the takeaway is that Biden and his aides aren't stupid. They know all the facts I've just outlined above. The White House simply believes that the American people are either too dumb or inattentive to realize that what they're claiming doesn't add up. And we're not. I like this website. I have 2 more things that I want to talk about, and then I'm going to end this episode, and I'm going to try and get through it as quickly as possible. This is from the Daily Wire, and it's by Megan Basham, and it's called "We're Closer to a Really Big War Than Most Civilians Want to Face, a Historian's Timely Predictions on Ukraine." So I figured since we're dealing with the Ukraine and Russia conflict right now, maybe we should look at this. When they sat down over coffee for the new Daily Wire series, The Search, podcaster Ben Shapiro and renowned historian Niall Ferguson couldn't have known just how timely their interview would prove to be. During a roving discussion taped in late January in Palm Beach, the pair dissected the United States' inability to properly weigh risk when it comes to foreign policy and what that fecklessness might mean to China and Russia. With a now eerie, how do you say that? Prescience? I don't know. I hate words that I've never seen before. Anyway, the Hoover Institute fellow tells Shapiro that, based on his knowledge of world skirmishes over the last 100 years, the Biden administration's weakness on the international stage will undoubtedly lead Russia to launch an attack on Ukraine. Quote, "The threat of sanctions is not going to stop Putin invading Ukraine," he says with surety. "I still think it's quite likely that he will increase his military aggression towards Ukraine because financial sanctions are not an effective deterrent, and I don't think they're an effective deterrent against the Chinese either." Weeks later, the same day the episode premiered, bombs began to fall in Kiev. The West's bizarre overreaction to the marginal danger posed by COVID compared to its apathy toward the serious threats China and Russia present dominates much of the 90-minute dialogue, available to Daily Wire subscribers. This is one of the odd things about safetyism, the cult of treating all risk as incredibly high. Ferguson points out, oddly enough, it desensitizes you to the real risks. And I think the U.S. has become pathologically incapable of thinking realistically about risk. How this has manifested, he explains, is with federal authorities pushing to mask children and force vaccines on young people who face almost no danger from the coronavirus while blithely ignoring the fact that the world's most powerful authoritarian regimes have suddenly begun behaving as allies. Yeah, this is predicted and this was prophesied in the book of Revelations that Russia and China would come together to control the oil, because when you control the oil, you dominate. So, I mean, this is prophesied. And not to be a doomer or anything like that, but there is no stopping it. It is prophesied, meaning it will happen. Nothing we do will stop it from happening. That doesn't mean that you don't fight against it and stand up for what's right, but we're not going to be able to stop it. We're closer to a really big war than most civilians want to face, he concludes. So legacies over risk. The looming reality of seismic geopolitical events leads the Friends to reflect on just how endemic, distorted perspectives have become in America. Ferguson says working on his last book, Doom, The Politics of Catastrophe, made him realize that while fear of a virus might have highlighted the problem, defective public choice has been around for at least 20 years. Generations ago, he explains, both the public and the federal government were better at assessing risk because they had no choice. I mean, coming out of the 30s and 40s, you confronted some very profound risks, nuclear war being the biggest, he says. But my sense is that the further away we got from World War II, the less good our elites have been at assessing risk, and the more inclined they have been to say, quote, why worry about probabilities? Let's assume that everything is a huge risk, and then let's design extraordinarily complex regulations to prevent risk, end quote. The unrealistic goal, he argues, appears to be to prevent death. For Shapiro, the shallowness that views the mere preservation of life as the greatest objective also explains our current national obsession with identity, as well as the epidemic of mental health issues plaguing younger generations. He points out with a bit of gallows humor that such a value structure can't help but breed a culture-wide sense of meaninglessness and unfulfillment. Like if assassins get me in the Everglades, honestly, they deserve it, he jokes, about a recent vacation with his family where it dawned on him that if his haters were to successfully gun him down, as online trolls have threatened to do over the years, he'd have to give them credit for their marksmanship. Like if they get that shot and they nail me and I'm floating among the mangroves and alligators, he laughs, I'll just have to give them credit. Like, really, that's an excellent hit. I hear Ben Shapiro's voice saying that. I'll just have to give them credit. Like, really, that's an excellent hit. That's a terrible impression. Forget I did that. What's clear a moment later is Shapiro's dark amusement comes from his deep sense of mission, his conviction that his life has a greater purpose than merely preserving his heartbeat. Like the men who founded the nation, he says he cares more about building something of lasting value than in being physically safe. My dad used to be kind of paranoid about me voicing my political opinions, Shapiro reveals, and he used to say, quote, are you sure you want to say this about Islamists, or are you sure you want to say this about the Chinese, end quote. Shapiro's answer, yeah, I am. I mean, at a certain point, you've got to say what you're going to say. Because that's what it takes, he argues, to build institutions that have the potential to transform a society from one in which happiness is found in the arbitrary notions of feeling personally affirmed, quote unquote affirmed, to one in which meaning is derived from accomplishment. If the ages have taught us anything, Shapiro says, it's that your happiness has very little to do with how you sit on a given day and has a lot more to do with whether you're building things of consequence. So building institutions. Though their critics often like to pretend otherwise, over the course of the discussion, both Ferguson and Shapiro are clear that their hope for the future doesn't lie solely in winning elections or quote-unquote owning libs, but in creating organizations that leave legacies for the future. When Ferguson reflects on the attitudes of millennials and Gen Z today, histrionic as they are over thought crimes and emotional offense, he admits the situation looks bleak. But he finds hope in what he calls Generation T, kids who began to develop societal awareness during the presidency of Donald Trump. There, he already sees what he believes is a sense that, quote, wokeness is boring and counterintuitive, end quote. But he doesn't believe their tendency to think in more level-headed, fact-based terms than the generation just ahead of them will flourish without help. They need, he argues, new institutions dedicated to developing an active and well-organized citizenry. There needs to be a strong sense of the citizens' ability to organize outside the structures of the state, Ferguson says. Part of the answer is to build institutions. We had to be better organized. People who thought of themselves as conservatives or classical liberals were terribly badly organized and basically lost control of the universities. It wasn't even that hard for the left to take over the universities. It's for this reason that, though he's personally an atheist, Ferguson believes so deeply in the power of religious community to breed civic responsibility. Part of the left's interest in destroying the influence of faith in something beyond government, he argues, is that it destroys the impulse to band together to protect individual freedoms. It's also what inspired him to join Barry Weiss, Steven Pinker, Larry Summers, and other independent thinkers to found the University of Boston, a new academic institution dedicated to a, quote, fearless pursuit of the truth, end quote. I'm quite interested in this challenge of institution building, Ferguson tells Shapiro. You've done that with the Daily Wire, and that's one of the things about you that I find most impressive. Near the end, Ferguson returns to Shapiro's point that he's not worried about dying so much as he's worried about leaving such work unfinished. I'd like to be able to die knowing I've started a bunch of things, he says, institutions that will keep going. That's an interesting, I'm going to have to go watch that interview. Last thing to speak about Russia and Ukraine, because we were talking about still buying oil from Russia. This is by Virginia Kruta, and it's with Jen Psaki. And so a reporter, a Fox News White House correspondent, Jackie Heinrich, challenged Press Secretary Jen Psaki directly during Thursday's briefing, asking whether or not the United States was effectively, quote, financing the war, end quote, Russia continues to wage against Ukraine. Heinrich suggested that as long as the sanctions imposed did not attack the energy sector and the United States continued to purchase oil and gas from Russia, Americans would be indirectly financing Putin's war every time they filled up their gas tanks. So she said, as long as we're buying Russian oil, though, aren't we financing the war? And then Psaki says, well, Jackie, again, it's only about 10% of what we're importing. Oh, okay. It's only 10%. We're only financing it with 10% of the money. I've not made any announcement about any decision on that front. Heinrich also asked about Biden's strategy to fix inflation, namely his contention that manufacturers should increase production in the U.S. to drive prices down, and pressed Psaki on why the administration would not apply the same logic to energy production. So she said, on gas, you just said less supply raises prices. It's not in our strategic interest to reduce the supply. We know the president has recently, as yesterday, talked about increasing domestic manufacturing to bring down prices on inflated items like goods. So why not apply the same logic to energy and increase domestic production here? That's what she asked. And Psaki says, well, there are 9,000 approved oil leases that the oil companies are not tapping into currently. So I would ask them that question. The Keystone Pipeline has never been operational. It would take years for that to have any impact, is what she said. During those years where it would take to bring down prices, as you're saying, we should just continue to buy Russian oil. Psaki continued to tout the steps the administration had already taken, including releases from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve that added up to a few days' worth of American oil consumption. Yeah, it only lasted days. And that's supposed to be put aside for emergencies. Well, Jackie, I think you're familiar with a number of steps we've taken, a historic release from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. She said, but that didn't bring down prices, last time or this time. Well, let me finish. What we can do over time is, and what this is all a reminder of in the president's view, is our need to reduce our reliance on oil. Yeah, let's go green when we don't have that capability. I miss the days of Kayleigh McEnany, someone who knew what they were talking about. Okay, this is an exclusive from Blaze Media by Chris Pandolfo, and I thought it was very interesting. It is kind of long, but I'm telling you, you need to listen to every bit of it. So, in response to a FOIA request, Freedom of Information Act, by the Blaze, HHS revealed that it purchased advertising from major news networks including ABC, CBS, and NBC, as well as cable TV news stations, Fox News, CNN, and MSNBC legacy media publications, including the New York Post, the Los Angeles Times, and the Washington Post, digital media companies like BuzzFeed News and Newsmax, and hundreds of local newspapers and TV stations. These outlets were collectively responsible for publishing countless articles and video segments regarding the vaccine that were nearly uniformly positive about the vaccine in terms of both its efficacy and safety. Hundreds of news organizations were paid by the federal government to advertise for the vaccines as part of a, quote, comprehensive media campaign, end quote, according to documents the Blaze obtained from the Department of Health and Human Services. The Biden admin purchased ads on TV, radio, in print, and on social media to build vaccine confidence, timing this effort with the increasing availability of the vaccines. The government also relied on earned media featuring influencers from communities hit hard by COVID and experts like White House Chief Medical Advisor Dr. Anthony Fauci and other academics to be interviewed and promote vaccination in the news. Though virtually all of these newsrooms produced stories covering the COVID vaccines, the taxpayer dollars flowing to their companies were not disclosed to audiences in news reports, since common practice dictates that editorial teams operate independently of media advertising departments, and news teams felt no need to make the disclosure, as some publications reached for comment explained. The Biden admin engaged in a massive campaign to educate the public and promote vaccination as the best way to prevent serious illness or death from COVID. Congress appropriated $1 billion in fiscal year 2021 for the Secretary of Health to spend on activities to, quote, strengthen vaccine confidence in the United States, end quote. Federal law authorizes HHS to act through the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and other agencies to award contracts to public and private entities to, quote, carry out a national evidence-based campaign to increase awareness and knowledge of the safety and effectiveness of vaccines for the prevention and control of diseases, combat misinformation about vaccines, and disseminate scientific and evidence-based vaccine-related information with the goal of increasing rates of vaccination across all ages to reduce and eliminate vaccine-preventable diseases, end quote. Anyone who has spent time reading the news, watching TV news coverage, or browsing social media in the past year has more than likely been exposed to the government's advertising. HHS ads posted to YouTube have been viewed millions of times, and commercials featuring celebrities like singer Sir Elton John and actor Sir Michael Caine have been the subject of news coverage, such as this feature from NBC News. I'm not going to play it because usually I get copyright strikes, but I'll link it in the description so you can go watch it if you want. Fear-based vaccine ads from HHS featuring survivor stories from coronavirus patients who were hospitalized in intensive care units were covered by CNN and discussed on ABC's The View when they were unveiled last October. Though the federal government was paying each of these companies and others for pro-vaccine advertising, while news reports cover the same vaccines, many editorial boards say they have firewall policies that prevent advertisers from influencing news coverage. Quote, advertisers pay for space to share their messages, as was the case here, and those ads are clearly labeled as such, end quote, explained Shani George, Vice President of Communications for The Washington Post, in a statement. Quote, the newsroom is completely independent from the advertising department, end quote. A spokeswoman for the Los Angeles Times gave a similar statement, emphasizing that the, quote, newsroom operates independently from advertising, end quote. The Blaze reached out to several other publications that either declined to comment or did not respond before publication. The COVID-19 public education campaign by HHS also used earned media outreach, word-of-mouth marketing, with the goal of having, quote, trusted messengers and influencers, end quote, speak to news organizations to, quote, provide factual, timely information and steps people can take to protect themselves, their families, and their communities, end quote. As a result of that effort, various government officials have frequently been quoted by reporters covering the COVID pandemic, offering factual information on vaccine efficacy and safety. An October article from BuzzFeed News featuring the quote-unquote essential facts about who is eligible for a booster shot, for example, reported pro-vaccine statements from CDC Director Rochelle Walensky, FDA official Peter Marks, HHS Secretary Xavier Becerra, and University of California, San Francisco epidemiologist George Rutherford. The article stressed how studies show quote-unquote boosters work and cited FDA data that suggests getting a booster shot, quote, can reestablish strong protection against the virus, end quote. BuzzFeed News advised everyone aged 65 or older, people with health conditions that put them at high risk of severe illness from COVID, those like healthcare workers who are at risk from coming into contact with COVID-positive people for work, and anyone in areas with high virus transmission to get vaccine boosters in accordance with the guidance from the CDC. Other publications, such as the Los Angeles Times, featured advice from experts on how readers could convince vaccine-hesitant people in their lives to change their minds. The Washington Post covered, quote, the pro-vaccine messages people want to hear, end quote. Newsmax has reported how the vaccines have, quote, been demonstrated to be safe and effective, end quote. and, quote, encourage citizens, especially those at risk, to get immunized, end quote. HHS did not immediately respond when asked if the agency used taxpayer dollars to pay for people to be interviewed or for a PR firm to place them in interviews with the news outlets. Since the COVID vaccines manufactured by Pfizer, BioNTech, Moderna, and Johnson & Johnson were given emergency approval for use in the U.S. last year, more than 250 million Americans have been fully vaccinated. An estimated 94.6 million people have also received at least one booster dose. About 65% of the U.S. population has now been fully vaccinated against COVID, including 75% of U.S. adults and 88.8% of seniors. HHS has not yet revealed how much advertising money was spent on each media platform. So, I just think that that's very important to know, that all of the pro-vaccine that we've been hearing from all of the media outlets, whether it be on TV, social media, YouTube, in print, on the radio, doesn't matter. They paid them to do it. And you're talking about Newsmax? Supposedly one of the most conservative news outlets that you can go to? And they took money to promote a vaccine? Now, I'm not saying that they can't promote it if they think it's good, if they're looking at data and they believe that data to be accurate and that vaccines work. I'm not saying that they can't say that kind of stuff, but would they be saying it if they hadn't been paid to say it? It's very sketchy, and I don't know if it works the same way. I know that on YouTube, if you have a sponsor and you are promoting their product to your listeners and your viewers, you have to inform them that you're being paid to do so. If you don't tell people that what you are talking about and promoting for them to go out and buy, that you're being paid to do that, I think you can get in trouble for that. I'm pretty sure. You have to disclose that information, that you're being paid to advertise something. And I don't see why it would be any different for news outlets. That's ridiculous. Would less people have gotten them? And maybe the ones that had adverse reactions to it would maybe have been spared all of that, because they wouldn't have had all of these people saying how great it was. Outlets that they thought that they could trust outside of left-wing legacy media. Maybe they heard it on Newsmax and thought, man, these people are so credible. They're the ones trying to tell the truth. So maybe they're right. I trust this outlet. I'm going to go do it. Had they not been paid to do that, would these people have not gone and gotten these? And then maybe they would have been spared these adverse reactions. Possibly even the ones that have died. It's something to think about. I have come to the realization that there's very few news outlets that I can trust. I feel like I can trust Matt Walsh, Michael Knowles, Elijah Schaffer, slightly offensive, or You Are Here. I feel like I can trust most of the people on Blaze TV and, Daily Wire. I feel like these people are credible. They talk about stuff. I do the research. I look into their sources, and I see that they're telling me the truth of what they're getting from the sources. Steven Crowder, I trust them. But they're about the only ones I trust. There's just not many people to trust anymore. We are lied to so often. Be very, very wary of who you trust when it comes to the news outlets that you listen to and you get your information from. Always look into it yourself. Always. I'm not going to talk about this today, but to point out the fact that you can't trust what you are told by most people. Elijah Schaffer brought this up about them finding a cure for HIV. And maybe I'll talk about this next week and do some research and look into it. But I found an article from WebMD that says that a third person living with HIV has been cured by a transplant. But that's not the most, that's great if that's true. I think that's wonderful. We found a cure for HIV/AIDS, but now there's a new variant of HIV that progresses to AIDS faster and may be more transmissible. It seems very, I don't know. So I think I'm going to look into this and maybe talk about this next week, because if that's true, It's very interesting, but I more so want to point out about the trust in our media outlets, our health institutions, and things like that. So I think that'll be interesting. But I'm going to leave the episode here for now. Thank you for joining me. I'm hoping that I can rebuild this audio platform back to at least what it was before they shut it down. I guess I'm going to just have to be more careful and not sound quote unquote hateful when I speak. I'm so confused that I had over a year's worth of episodes saying the same stuff and never changed what I said. I never censored myself on that platform because I didn't think I needed to. And then all of a sudden it's just gone after I've been doing it for over a year. And this is when they finally decide to do something with no warning. So I don't get it. But please help me build this one back up. I would greatly appreciate it. It would mean so much to me if I could get this built back up to what it was. Anyway, you can go to anchor.com. If you're going to listen to it on Anchor, it's anchor.fm/Lauren-Collins35. And so you can go there. You'll still be able to get it on Spotify. Obviously, there will be a link for it. This is going to go up on a new Spotify account. It's still called I Just Gotta Say Something. So you'll just have to go to the one that has less episodes uploaded than the other one. But you can go to both. Go to both. Anyway, go to YouTube. Watch my videos, like and share them, and then subscribe. That would be great. Hit the notification bell so you know when I upload a new video. And also, I think I'm going to try and do an episode on Friday, another faith-based episode that I think might be interesting, and I hope that you'll join me for that. Anyway, I hope you have a good rest of your day, and God bless.